Hello. Hello, and welcome to Faces of History, a mosaic of American memoirs. For the past year, these students and parents and Mrs. Sisk and I have devoted ourselves to the very special study of American history. And what a very important year it has been to study American history. George Santayana, a Spanish-American philosopher, wrote over 100 years ago, "Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it." With all of its dignity and all of its depravity, the history of our American culture is worth a careful read. These students are just at the beginning of this process, and I hope that this year of our meeting together every Thursday has flamed a small spark of curiosity and a hunger for more knowledge and more insight. Because of our fully integrated and spiraling curriculum at Classical Conversations, we have concurrently studied the arts of grammar and writing, which is actually the chief focus of our class that we call Essentials of the English Language. While reading and writing about famous American figures and events, we have been learning the special jobs of our 8 parts of speech, the mechanics of over 100 different sentence distinct patterns, and dozens of grammatical dress-ups, decorations, and advanced vocabulary, which all make our writing more mature, more interesting, and more compelling. So be sure to listen for ly adverbs, prepositional phrase openers, complex sentences including dependent clauses and complex conjunctions, very short sentences used for impact, quality adjectives, strong verbs, similes, metaphors, and so much more. Not only do we individually practice the arts of grammar and writing, but we also listen carefully. We listen to each other's work. We identify these important tools, and we give praise where they are used well. So today I challenge you to keep your ears open today, and I bet you'll learn something new too. In fact, we're going to have a pop quiz at the end. Today you will catch a glimpse of our great American experience from the early, struggling years of colonial life to the privileged and sometimes luxurious days of current sports and culture. Our presenters will walk you chronologically through time, with one exception. Today we've asked Harriet Tubman to kick off our program, and so without further ado, take it away, Harriet.
Always tired, I rocked Miss Susan's baby back and forth, knowing if I fell asleep and the baby cried, I'd be whipped ferociously. Day and night, I rocked the baby. One time, while Miss Susan fought with her husband, she turned her back. I wanted to take some sugar because I never tasted sugar, and it looked so good. However, before I could even touch it, Miss Susan saw me and reached for her whip. I ran out the door. After lots of running, I fought for breath and climbed into a pig pen to hide. By the 5th day, I could not endure the hunger any longer. I had to go back to my owner. I never knew my childhood would lead me to the Underground Railroad and a life of freedom, but I could not have done it without God's help. Hearing my story will change your life and faith forever. Around 1820, I was born in a teeny shack with no windows. I became one of Ben and Old Rick's 9 children. Sadly, the whole family lived in slavery. We lived in Maryland on Mr. Barnes's plantation. As a child in a potato sack dress, I watched with my mother as my master sold my sisters away, crying for Mama. I remember asking, where are they going? At 6 years old, Mr. Barnes hired me out, just like my sisters. I worked for a weaver and trapper, checking the traps for muskrats. One time, I felt terribly ill, but my master thought I was faking and forced me to work all day. At dinner, my eyes blurred, my head ached, and my nose burned. He took me back to my owner and called me useless. As I grew older, I started working in the fields with my parents. One time, I saw a slave running away. I followed him at full speed. Breathless, we ran into a shop, and his master stood there waiting. He picked up a 2-pound weight and aimed it at the slave, but instead, it hit me right in the head. That injury plagued me with random sleep seizures and migraines for the rest of my life. As an adult, everyone knew me as a bold, kind woman. I knew my life needed to change. Soon after marrying John, I heard that Mr. Broadus was going to sell me to the chain gang going south, where slaves barely eat and are treated the worst of all slaves in America. I tried to convince John to escape with me, but he refused and threatened to tell the master if I tried. In the middle of the night, while he slept, I left the plantation with 2 pieces of bread, no money, and no guidance except for the North Star. My only company was God, and I kept praying, I'm going to hold steady on you, and you got to see me through. And he did. On the Underground Railroad, many people led me to freedom in Pennsylvania. It felt so strange. You're not going to believe this. I rented my own house, and I worked my own job, and I kept the money. But soon after, I heard that my family was going to be sold to the chain gang. I had to go back and rescue them. Many friends tried to convince me not to, but they failed. Eventually, I went to Maryland 19 times and helped 300 slaves travel to freedom, including my family. During one trip, the fugitive slave law passed, and now I had to bring my runaways all the way to Canada. From then on, I threatened people with a gun to keep moving forward, because if they turned back, we would all get punished. We traveled through swamps and rivers so the bloodhounds couldn't catch our scent. One time, the authorities offered $40,000 for my capture, dead or alive. They never succeeded. In 1861, the Civil War broke out, and I was longing for more adventures. I became a nurse in the Army and helped black soldiers learn how to fight for themselves and make their own decisions because they were so used to being told what to do. I also saved many soldiers from death due to my medical knowledge of herbs. They tasted terrible, but they worked. I became a spy, and everyone trusted me because I knew the swamps and rivers by heart and could sneak up to the Southern armies. Later, I became the commander of the intelligence operation. Many generals adored me. And when 756 former slaves joined the army, I worked even harder. After the war, I helped the women's suffrage movement by making speeches in front of crowds. I remarried Nelson Davis and adopted my daughter, Gertie. I lived in Auburn, New York until my death in 1913. Even though I always remained in debt, I never refused a person in need of help. I, bold, kind, brave, Harriet Tubman, suffered a hard childhood with many whippings and a horrible injury, but it led me to infamy as the most famous Underground Railroad conductor and Civil War spy in my later life. God helped me the whole way. Always trust in God through all your days and thank Him for the things He has done for you. No matter what the circumstances, freedom endures in faith.
On an old rickety ship, I sailed from England to North America. I am the man who made friends with the savage natives. My name is Miles Standish. Before that historic journey, I was born in 1584. Teasing me, my enemies called me Captain Shrimp. My reputation proudly included being a one-man army because I was so tough. Maybe that's why the Pilgrims hired me. As a soldier, I was known as Miles Standish. Pilgrims, who are remembered as the founders of Plymouth Colony, sailed with me from England to North America. I was called a stranger. I was hired to leave England on the Mayflower on a quest to find new land. I exemplified bravery. In 1620, we set out on our perilous journey. It wasn't easy for some, but we finally boarded the ship and left. For nearly 15 years before our departure, the Mayflower, which had held hats and other stuff, including shirts, pants, was still a worthy ship. I was 36 now. We were destined to arrive in the New World someday. While our journey lasted, I trained the people on the Mayflower to hunt. I also taught them how to shoot and aim. During our quest, we drafted the Mayflower Compact. Then, crying fervently, a man screamed, "Land!" It was a glorious sight. We dropped anchor close to shore. Armoring ourselves, myself and 15 other men sailed to shore in a utilitarian boat. We were examining the land. While we were searching for weeks for a place to settle, we had to return to the Mayflower numerous times. On February 7, 1621, Indians appeared. They were standing on top of a bush-covered hill. We laid our weapons down slowly, but as soon as the natives recognized them, they quickly scattered. 2 weeks passed. It was almost New Year's Day. Suddenly, out of the forest proudly strode an esteemed figure who was called Samoset. He carried a bow and 2 arrows. "Welcome," he greeted happily. He explained that he was traveling to meet another Indian named Squanto, who was the chief of the Wampeg. We talked until he had to depart. On March 22nd, Samoset visited again with Squanto. We met and had a gargantuan feast with our new friends. Today, that day is called Thanksgiving. And that is my tale, not all of it, but most of it. I, Miles Standish, sailor, soldier, and stranger, was hired to leave my country on a perilous journey. I was exploring with the Pilgrims. The ship we sailed on was quite decrepit. It was called the Mayflower. I was 36 when we first spotted land in the New World. Searching desperately, we also found Indians and celebrated Thanksgiving. The most significant aspect of my life is that I survived the Mayflower journey while nearly half the travelers, including my wife, died of illness. My tale is fondly remembered even today.
Whose parents would imagine their son would be one of the biggest influencers of a new nation? One little boy became such a man. I spent my early life doing several jobs and learned a lot by reading books. I was not a regular inventor. I spent my early life doing several jobs and liked reading books. I looked around for things people needed. Diligently, I worked hard and helped build America to what it is today. I, Benjamin Franklin, was born on January 26, 1706. I was the 15th child of 17 in the home of my parents, Josiah and Abby Franklin. My father taught me how to design soap because that was his trade. But I did not enjoy making soap. So my second job was to make candles. I made them during the day and at night stayed up reading by the glow of a candle. My third job was to work for my older brother James, who was a printer. He taught me the whole printing process. I ceased eating meat so I could use the money to buy more books. I learned a lot from the books, even learning how to swim just by reading about it. I also secretly wrote for James's paper under a fake pen name because he didn't want me to write for his paper. My thirst for knowledge drove me to pursue many jobs and read as many books as were available to me. I love to invent things. In my time in the colonies, fire could break out at any time. Lightning caused the worst fires, so I invented the lightning rod. The lightning rod would hit the rod and not the house, preventing many fires. Is your fireplace working poorly? My Franklin stove forced the heat into the house while making smoke up the chimney. I read so many books that I needed to reach the ones on the very top shelf, so I invented the library chair. If you put up the seat, out pops a lighter to help reach the upper shelves. I also invented bifocals, so older folks could see close and far away. My inventions help people in their everyday lives. My discoveries made me esteemed around the United States and also the world. But that was not all I was known for. I was a member of the state government in Pennsylvania. I traveled to London to ask for more rights from the colonies from the tyrant, King George. Even though I was not successful, I stayed there for many years. I also helped draft the Declaration of Independence. Later, I journeyed to France to ask for money and soldiers to fight against the British. I persuaded the French to help America win the war. I worked out the peace treaty with England when they surrendered. After the fighting was over, I resolved to help America gain her freedom. I spent my early life doing several jobs and learned a lot by reading books. I was not a regular inventor. I looked around for things people need in their everyday lives. I was prominent in building America to what it is today. My legacy is on the pages of history and of America's freedom. Currently, 330 million people enjoy the freedoms that I helped secure for the United States of America.
can't say as ever I was lost, but I was bewildered once for 3 days. Think of one of the greatest outdoorsmen, hunter, frontiersman, soldier, pathfinder, and leader. That man is me, Daniel Boone. From a young age, I had a strong passion for the outdoors. I was born in Pennsylvania on October 22nd, 1734. At the time, there was no America, only the 13 English colonies. I was born into a Quaker family called the Boones. I was the sixth child of a man named Squire and his wife Sarah. And since the day I could crawl, I adored the outdoors. When I was about 5, smallpox broke out among the world, so my family and I were stuck inside, and I loathed every minute of it. My sister Elizabeth and I constructed a plan to sneak out at night, meet with someone we knew had the virus, and lay in bed with him. Once you got the virus, you couldn't get it again. So we finalized our plan, and surely we fell ill. Our plan worked, we thought, as our mother treated us. Surprisingly, we survived, and by the age of 10, my father bought a huge field, and I was designated the job to care for the cows. When I wasn't doing so, I would hunt small game like birds and squirrels with a spear that I crafted out of a sapling. When I hunted, I would wear things like a buckskin tunic. At 13, my dad bought me a rifle so I could hunt bigger things like deer, elk, and bear. I learned how to read and write from the wife of my older brother. In 1750, my dad had had enough of Pennsylvania because it started to get too crowded. So in April of that same year, we left for Virginia. In 1753, I took my mind off the outdoors and started thinking about marriage. I joined the army at the age of 20 to fight in the French and Indian War as a wagon driver and a blacksmith under the command of General Braddock. We were easy targets to the Indians and the French because of our red coats. We were ready for attack when suddenly General Braddock was viciously shot and killed. When he died, Commander George Washington took the lead and told us wagon drivers to slice the ties on the wagons and leave with the horses. So I returned home and married Rebecca Bryan. In 1767, I traveled west on a long hunt and saw huge mountains and thick forests. I thought this was paradise. This place was called Kentucky. We didn't have any land, so an officer from the war offered us a peace in exchange for building a town, which we called Boonesboro. A few years later, the Indians attacked and I was painfully shot in the ankle. The bullet broke the bone and it took months to heal. A few months later, the town was running out of salt to preserve the food, so I went with a group of townsfolk to a salt lake to retrieve salt. When we arrived, we got ambushed by Shawnee Indians. The others who came with me all got slaughtered, but they spared me. In order for that to happen, they made me do a race against the other Indians. There was a twist, though. The Indians had thick sticks, and they would hit me with them. If I fell, I would be doomed. I had to persevere, and I did it, so the chief of the Shawnee took me in as his son. One day, weeks later, I escaped and quickly returned home. When I arrived, there was no one home. I asked a few other families where my family went, and they told me North Carolina. There were rumors that went around that I was a traitor. I was going to return to North Carolina, but before I could do so, the Indians attacked one final time. They were shooting arrows that were on fire to burn the town down. We had to grab buckets of water and throw them on the fire to keep it from spreading. We realized they were tunneling underground and were making insane progress. One day it started to rain, which turned off the fire and it made the dirt turn into mud, so the tunnel collapsed, and the Indians retreated. People called it a gift from God. I finally could return home and live out my days. I returned home and met up with my family. I departed this life on September 26, 1820. My final words were, "I'm going. My time has come." This is the story of my life. I will always be remembered throughout history as the greatest frontiersman, outdoorsman, and pathfinder.
If you thought Presidents 1 and 2 were awesome, wait till you hear about me, President number 3. That's right, I'm Thomas Jefferson, 3rd President of the USA. I was also a lawyer, an architect, an author, a governor, a diplomat, and a vice president. But before we get into that, let's hit the beginning. I was the third of 10 children born to Jane and Peter Jefferson on April 13, 1743. Because my father never had an education, he was determined that I'd start school at age 5. I studied Latin, Greek, and French. Amo libros, that's Latin for I love books. By age 16, I entered the College of William and Mary to study math and physics. I will be perfectly honest, my first year of college was spent dancing at many parties and devoted 15 hours a day to reading. In fact, one of my most famous quotes is, "I cannot live without books." I completed law school in 1767 and 2 years later was elected to Virginia legislature. Around 1768, I created my home, Monticello, and started a family. Monticello is Italian for Little Mountain. I soon married Martha Wayland Skelton on New Year's Day in 1772. Boy, was she ever pretty, and we both shared a love for books and music, so we had a lot to talk about. Not long after this, the American Revolution began, and good old George Washington needed my help. A document was required to declare separation from the British. I don't mean to toot my own horn, but toot toot! I was the original member of the Fab Five. That's right, this comedy was made up of me, my bestie John Adams, Benjamin Franklin, Roger Sherman, and Robert Livingston, though the other four gave me a lot of input. Let's be frank, I seriously wrote the Deck of Indy, and they just proofread it, but that's between you and me. Finally, on July 4th, 1776, the Deck of Indy was formally adopted by Congress. After this, everything else was really icing on the cake. I became the governor of Virginia in 1779 and went to France as a U.S. diplomat in 1784, and in 1789 became the first Sec of State. In 1796, I ran for president but lost to my bestie, John Adams. I became his vice president and ran again for president in the 1800s. This time I beat my bestie and served 2 terms from 1801 to 1809. This means I ran for president 3 times. There's that number 3 again. During my first term, one of my greatest achievements was the Louisiana Purchase from France. It allowed the Great Western Exploration to double the size of the USA for $15 million. Good thing I had been pals with Napoleon when I was a diplomat over there. I was exhausted and old after all this work, so I moved back to Monticello, but decided to open up the University of Virginia. When I had to do something in my retirement, why not start a college? On July 4th, 1826, I passed away at Monticello. Crazy fact number 1, my bestie John Adams died on the same exact day. Crazy fact number 2, this was also the 50th anniversary of the Deck of Indy. What are the odds? Some other president named Monroe also died many years later, making me one of 3 presidents to share that amazing day. There's that 3 again. I was happy to serve my country and thankful for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But most of all, I was thankful for God for giving me these blessings.
So, I am a prisoner of war and claim to be treated as such. This statement I proclaimed when I was only 13, after my British captor ordered me to clean his boots. I was born on March 15, 1767, in South Carolina to Irish immigrants. As a boy during the American Revolution, my brother and I were captured by the British. This was when that British officer ordered me to clean his boots. This strong will and fiery temper helped me accomplish many great things in my life. In my early career, I served in law and government. Later, I fought in the War of 1812 and became the hero of the Battle of New Orleans. Eventually, I was elected President of the United States and became known as the People's President. I am Andrew Jackson. Early in my career, I held many positions in law and government. In 1778, I moved from the Carolinas to the Tennessee Territory to serve as prosecutor in the young city of Nashville. Soon, I became a judge and was so eager for justice that my decisions were described as short, untechnical, unlearned, sometimes ungrammatical, and generally right. When Tennessee became estate in 1796, I was selected to be its representative in the U.S. Congress and later a senator. In 1802, I was chosen to lead the Tennessee militia, often fighting off attacks from the Indians. Working and serving the people, I gained much popularity in my early career. During the War of 1812, I proved myself an exemplary American hero. In January of 1813, I led my troops on an expedition to New Orleans, but when we had almost arrived, we were ordered back. Unfortunately, our supplies were diminished, so I took money out of my own personal wallet to buy food and other supplies for my men, and put the sick on my own horses. As we trudged back to Tennessee, my men started talking about how tough I was. Tough as Old Hickory. The nickname stuck. Soon after I had returned to Tennessee, government officials once again ordered me to New Orleans to defend it from the invading British in December of 1814. Building barricades out of cotton bales and mud with a mixed group of soldiers, volunteers, and pirates under the command of Jean Lafitte, we prepared to fight. Cleverly, we fired from behind the barricades, picking off the British like ducks in a shooting gallery. Within 30 minutes, we killed or captured over 2,000 British troops and quickly won the battle. A peace treaty, which ended the war, had already been signed in Europe, but none of us knew it. Nevertheless, I was hailed a hero of New Orleans. About 9 years after the War of 1812, I earned the title Jackson, the People's President. In 1824, my friends had convinced me to run for president. Although I won more popular votes, I lost this election. However, since many people thought of me as a common man like them, partly because I had been born in a log cabin and had little schooling, I won the next election. A newspaper called it a proud day for the American people. Instead of a formal inaugural ball, I invited anyone and everyone to the White House. Things got wild. During my 2 terms in office, I vetoed bills that favored the rich and fought the Bank of the United States, calling it a monster. Unfortunately, I thought settlers and natives would never live peacefully together. So I signed the Indian Removal Act, which led to the tragic Trail of Tears. Although I was considered the people's president, I did not necessarily help all people. During my early career, I worked in law and government. I later proved myself a hero at the Battle of New Orleans. Elected to presidency, I labored to be the people's president. Most significantly, my dedication to the common man drove me to serve the people until my death in 1845. I, Andrew Jackson, remain a popular American hero.
Who is the man that traveled through the Louisiana Territory and left the world with a mysterious death? Who is the man that traveled courageously off the edge of the map? Me, Meriwether Lewis. My childhood, my expedition, and my death is why my story is the greatness in my life. The Revolutionary War had just begun, and I was a stripling boy of 4 when a tragedy struck. Departing for the war, my father would never return. He was assigned to work in General Washington's army to fight the British, and died in battle. I was an active boy. I regularly ventured alone in the thick woods because when nobly my strong father died, I became man of the house. Heading home one specific day, I saw hostile smoke rising from my cottage, which was called Locust Hill. Obstinately presuming that it was curling up from the chimney, I hurried along. Actually, it was a fire which had started and was the cause of the smoke. Appalled, I yelled, "Fire! Fire! Bring a ladder!" When no one immediately responded, I hastily climbed a locust tree that luckily grew near my home. Futilely, I tried to put out the fire myself. As I endeavored to try, I sadly burned my hands, but with the adroit help of my brave slaves, we put out the fire. The next lonesome morning, I lumbered to an inn, where I accomplished a meeting with Thomas Jefferson, who is the current governor of the state of Virginia. In the inn, I had told adventurous tales about the woods that I had walked in the night before. During my older life, I nobly became captain of the Corps of Discovery. On May 21st, 1804, I ventured through the Mississippi River into the Missouri River. The first time our party encountered Indians was August 2nd, 1804. I commanded to fire the cannon as a welcome salute to the 250 of them who were perched on the banks. Actually, we met numerous Indian tribes, including the Sioux tribe. Along the way, we found an Indian named Sacagawea. She was the bravest woman I have ever met in my short lifetime. She even bore a child during our trip. We encountered grizzly bears and even found a new type of animal that we named prairie dogs. Commander Clark, my co-captain, and I endured tremendous struggles together. We finally found the Pacific Ocean. Then we started heading back to Washington. Following our prominent plan, on our return journey, as we approached Washington, I strove to cover as much land as possible, splitting up the remainder of our company with Clark. After many additional adventures, adroitly we connected at the western border of North Dakota. Endeavoring for home, I embarked east again, so that shortly we reached the southern border of Illinois. While on this stretch of journey, we encountered Major James Neely and his servant. During one of the nights together, Neely searched for two of the horses that had sprinted away. On October 10th, 1809, we found an inn, the Grinder Inn, but Major Neely had not returned. That night, I died. I went to sleep at 11 o'clock, and at 2 o'clock, 2 shots were fired. As I lay dying, I cried out for help, but no one answered. I was 35 when I died. At noon the following day, my body was sovereignly laid in a grave. Who killed me, no one knows. I was an active boy and owned a gun. When I was just 4 years old, my father died. My life was filled with struggles, but I nobly accepted the position of captain of the Corps of Discovery. My mysterious death at the Grinder Inn was tragic, as I expected numerous years of my life, but it was God's plan for me. The most significant aspect of my life is that I led the Lewis and Clark expedition, which showed Americans how vast the United States is. Although my life was short, it was full of adventures. Thank you.
I've been to every state, every country, and even to the moon. People have written songs and books about me, and I even have my own code of rules, but we'll talk about that later. I like to hang out in the sky, over graveyards and schools, and I even have my own holiday. Who am I? On January 1st, 1776, George Washington raised the Grand Union American flag in Boston. The British thought we had surrendered because the Grand Union flag looked too much like the British flag. Then the British soldiers started writing letters to King George that the British had won the war. George Washington was angry. "We will never give up. We will fight for our freedom. We need a new flag. This is the story of me, the American flag." George Washington and Betsy Ross were friends from church, and she had already made some clothes for him. George needed a seamstress and brought a secret committee to Betsy's house. They showed her a sketch of a new flag and asked if she could sew it. Betsy made 2 changes. She noticed that the star said 6 points, but she knew how to carefully fold a piece of cloth and just one snip make a 5-pointed star. She also changed the square shape of their flag to a rectangle so it would fly better. The result was me, a ginormous flag with 13 stars on a blue field and 13 red and white stripes, all representing the 13 colonies. By 1795, I had 15 stars and 15 stripes for the 15 states. But this was a problem, because either I would get too big to fly, or my beautiful red and white stripes would get too small to see. In 1818, Congress decided to keep 13 stripes for the 13 original colonies and to add a new star for every new state. I liked the idea because I wanted to keep flying. Over 183 years, my look changed 26 times, but my colors stayed the same. I have my own book of rules, and I even have my own song, now called our national anthem. During the War of 1812, Francis Scott Key saw my broad stripes and bright stars still waving in the morning light, and was so excited that he wrote me a song. And about my rules, did you know that if I'm flying at night, I must be lit up? I may not be bowed to any world leader or person. In distress, fly me upside down. If I'm flown half-mast, that means a tragedy has happened, and do not let me touch the ground. By 1958, I have 48 stars and 13 stripes. Robert Heft, a 17-year-old high school student who loved flags, loved to read, and loved politics, read in the newspaper that 2 more states were going to be added, Alaska and Hawaii. He had a class project, so he made a 50-star and 13-stripe flag for the 2 new states. His teacher, who didn't realize that 2 new states were coming, gave him a B- on the project and asked, "Why did you put 50 stars on the flag?" When Robert questioned his grade, the teacher said, "If you can get your flag approved by President Eisenhower, then I'll change your grade to an A." Well, as you all know today, I have 50 stars and 13 stripes, and Robert Heft's grade got changed to an A. You might know me as Old Glory, Stars and Stripes, the Red, White, Blue, Star-Spangled Banner, or the United States flag, but it doesn't really matter what you call me. My blue stands for justice, my white stands for purity, and my red stands for bravery. I fly for freedom, and when people see me, they say, "I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all."
A pioneer and a patriot. Okay. Do I just say this? Growing up in the country, my interest for hunting and fishing was extreme. The love of justice, I entered politics with a great passion that got me to climb in a newspaper to be half horse, half alligator with a low touch of snapping turtle. I was famous for saying, "Be sure you are right, and then go ahead." With the state of mind, I lost my life at the mission of Alamo. I.D. Crock was born August 17th in 1786 in the backwoods of Tennessee. I was 7 years old when When my father built a mill that was destroyed by a flood, he then bought a tavern where people would stop, eat, and sleep. That is where I met a Dutchman who needed help with his cow, so he hired me. I was 12 years old when this happened. I was very sad to leave my family. The Dutchman taught me how to shoot a rifle, and I became an incredible hunter. I rode a rifle, which I named Old Betsy. As I grew up, I entered several shooting competitions. I usually won. It is during one of those that I met Polly and immediately fell in love. I was 20 years old when I married her, and we had 3 beautiful children. I enjoyed my life in the countryside of Tennessee, taking care of my lovely family by farming and hunting. In 1813, Native Americans attacked Fort Mims in Alabama and killed over 100 people. I became a soldier under the authority of General Andrew Jackson. During that time, I provided food for our regiment by shooting wildlife. I also entertained my battalion around the campfire with wild stories of my bear hunting days. In 1817, I traveled to a frontier land in Tennessee with a lot of new settlers. No laws had been established, so I became a judge to help that matter. I eventually became a congressman and fought to help Native Americans keep their land. Sadly disappointed with politics, I left my position and embarked on a new adventure in Texas. In 1835, Texas still belonged to Mexico. On my way, I stopped at the Alamo Mission, where men were staying and fighting for independence. With the spirit of liberty or death, we defended our fortunes. On March 5th, in 1836, 5,000 Mexican soldiers attacked us. I died in the battle and became a legend. Tall tales about me started soon after because of my closeness to nature. Most of them are about me talking to animals and them responding. Amazingly lucky to have been taught how to use a rifle at a really young age, I learned to defend the people that originally owned this land that I love. While politics interested me, enjoying the outside world and exploring new frontiers was my passion. Stories about me riding a serpent or even teaching rabbits to dance still linger today. As a pioneer and patriot, I fought for liberty to the end of the famous Battle of the Alamo.
People come from all over the world to see my massive memorial, which towers over their heads. However, you would never guess if you had seen my birthplace, a tiny log cabin with 1 room and 1 window. I'm going to tell you about my childhood, my path to becoming a president, and being a wartime president. Throughout my childhood, I continued to educate myself. I was born in Hodgenville, Kentucky in 1809. Although all of my school only amounted to 1 year of my normal life, I frantically read books. I worked at a general store, and all the people I met thought it was odd that I was glued to a book every second I got. One day I was asked by my neighbor to go with his son to New Orleans. I saw what I later described as slaves being driven in chains and auctioned like cattle. My mother, who taught me prayers and Bible stories, died when I was 9, and my father was killed by an Indian when he was planting a cornfield. As a child, I practiced debate with my friends. After I grew up, I studied for 3 years on my own before passing exams to practice law. I used my law degree to later enter politics. Although I entered politics as a Whig, I soon joined the Republican Party, which wanted to kill slavery, and I had become a leading anti-slavery spokesperson. In 1858, I ran as a Republican for Senate against the arrogant Democrat Stephen Douglas. That summer, I challenged him to a series of debates. Amazingly, more than 15,000 people showed up to the debates. Douglas argued that a nation can remain half slave and half free. Douglas believed the Supreme Court's decision in the Dred Scott case should be upheld when it ruled as the law of the land the blacks do not have white rights. I responded by stating, a house divided against itself cannot stand, meaning that our nation cannot stay divided, half slave and half free. If Kansas and Oklahoma had a war, we wouldn't be prepared for other nations attacking. As for the Dred Scott case, I believe that the Supreme Court was wrong. Blacks should have equal rights. I pointed out that the Declaration of Independence stated that all men are created equal. Douglas once called me two-faced, and I responded, if I were two-faced, why would I wear this one? I lost the Senate race, but my popularity skyrocketed. And 2 years later, I ran for president for the Republican Party. Shockingly, I won. I became the 16th president of the United States in 1860. The South was mad. They called me the Black Republican because they knew I was anti-slavery. Within 4 months, South Carolina seceded from the Union. When the South attacked Fort Sumter, the war had begun. The North was set up to win. They had more supplies from their factories and better navy. On December 3, 1862, I signed the Emancipation Proclamation freeing all slaves forever. After a particularly bloody battle called Gettysburg, where we lost 170,000 men, I went to the battlefield to dedicate a cemetery and give a speech that I hated but others thought was the best in American history. This is how it began. 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth upon this continent a new nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. The war raged on, and in 1864, I was reelected. Then the next spring, in 1865, the South surrendered. The war was finally over. And less than a week later, on April 14th, I went to a theater with my wife and was assassinated by John Wilkes Booth, the famous actor, who was cornered in a barn and shot a few months later. I died at 56. During my presidency, I freed all of the nation's slaves and kept the Union together. Now you have heard about my childhood and my path to being a president and being a wartime president. The next time you see the Lincoln Memorial, remember my fight for blacks to have the same rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness that the rest of America has.
Buffalo Bill, never missed and never will. Have any of you ever dreamed of being a cowboy when you grow up? Cowboys ride horses all day long and wrangle cows to move them from one ranch to another. Cowboys do not have to attend school. The prairie is their classroom. Shooting, hunting, traveling, fighting, roping, and bulldogging are all adventures that cowboys in the Wild West did for fun and money. One of the most colorful cowboys ever to live and one who remains a Western icon is William Friedrich Cody, but you may know me as Buffalo Bill. So, how did I become a cowboy? Well, let me tell you. Because my dad died when I was just a lad of 9, I had to grow up quickly. When my family needed money, I secured a job working as a cattle driver behind a wagon train, which is a long group of covered wagons that travel together across the spacious grassland to the western states. With safety in numbers, we could transport the needed supplies and also have protection from Indian attacks and robbers. Though I was young, I was not weak. At 12 years old, I became the youngest cowboy on the wagon train. Although it saddened me to leave my family for this job, I proudly brought home $50 to my ma. In today's money, that would be $1,650.57. However, this did not cover the expenses for long, so I had to find another job and do a man's work. At the age of 15, I found my next job with the Pony Express, which was a group of young expert riders who'd risk their lives daily to deliver the mail across the treacherous plains. I was hired for the dangerous and death-defying Sweetwater Run. My run stretched a distance of 322 miles, just taking under a day to complete. Close to 20 horses were necessary to finish my dash. At each station, I only had 15 seconds to change horses and saddlebags, called mochillas. Don't worry, I stopped about every 100 miles to take a break, eat, and use the outhouse. Because I would have to jump off my horse at full speed, changing horses was one of the most risky parts of my job. In addition, Indians or swindlers who wanted the mail would try and attack me during my run. Not to brag, but the Indians never caught me. The most exciting news I ever delivered as a Pony Express rider was the announcement that Abraham Lincoln won the election for the presidency. Energizing and electrifying, this job always remained my favorite. My stories turned me into a cowboy legend, with everyone across the world wanting to hear of my experiences. I created a Wild West show where people not only listened to my tall tales, but also had the chance to experience my lifestyle. I brought the West to the people around America and even in Europe. Traveling with bison, elk, horses, Indians, and cowboys, we reenacted scenes from Pony Express runs, stagecoach robberies, and well-known battles between cowboys and Indians. In my cast, I even had the most celebrated lady marksman, Annie Oakley, in the famous Indian Sitting Bull. Thousands of people loaded onto trains, into wagons, and upon horses to race for a ticket to my remarkable Wild West show. Sadly, my show ended, but you can still read about my life in dime novels, which are little books telling about my life and my adventures. There are 2,000 of my stories written down, and each story became more interesting than the one before. Even the illustrations of my life were exciting and showed the action-packed life I lived. Leaving behind the buffalo to freely roam, my prairie playground, and a distinguished legacy, I died on January 10, 1917. I, William Frederick Cody, will always be labeled as Buffalo Bill and the cowboy of the American West frontier. Due to the sad circumstances of my pa's death, I had to quickly become an adult and earn money to provide for my family at a very young age. The Pony Express Sweetwater Run provided experiences that taught me to be brave and to rely on myself even in hard and dangerous situations. Remember most notably from my Wild West show, I treasure the thought that my show brought the excitement of the West to city folk across the world. If you want to read about my dangerous adventures, you can find them in dime novels, which can still be bought today. I will never be forgotten as the most entertaining showman, the greatest rider, wrangler, hunter, fighter, roper, and bulldogger who ever graced the plains of the American frontier.
Do you imagine I could send 1 million volts of electricity through my body and survive? Extraordinarily, I, Nikola Tesla, did. I did this to prove that alternating current can be safe, even though electricity is very dangerous. My life, inventions, and jobs reveal that I qualify as an ingenious man. My life began on July 10, 1856, in Smiljan, Croatia. Because I was born, the United States has radio. After finishing Graz, I went to research engineering in Prague, Czechoslovakia. After I graduated, I sailed to Paris, France, and then to England, and finally, the United States. Ferociously in 1912, I refused the Nobel Prize because I had to share it with Thomas Alva Edison, who was my arch rival. I hated that despicable man. In 1917, I accepted the Edison Medal of the American Institute of Electrical Engineers. My life was full of inventions, and I will tell you about them. Inventions like the alternating current and radio boats were a gift to me because I liked to engineer things. I triumphantly created many different things like a new Graham dynamo, a Tesla coil, and wireless fluorescent lights. I also invented different air cores, radar systems, a telephone repeater, a new steam turbine, and even a new hydroelectric plant. Now you're thinking, how did I get so much money? His name was J.P. Morgan. Morgan, who was a rich tycoon, helped me with millions of things by supplying me with lots of money. As an electrical engineer, I had lots of jobs. I went to work for Thomas Alva Edison at his research lab in New York City. We totally disagreed about electrical currents. I excitedly announced alternating current would be much better than direct current, which he was using. He declared no, so we departed, with me starting my new company, Tesla Electric Company. We created many different electrical things, but in the end, I was swindled by my financiers and was given a worthless stock certificate. That was not the end of my career. I did not look for another engineering job right away. I became a sloppy ditch digger. After that, my foreman introduced me to a bulky official at the Western Union Telegraph Company. They supported me with money. Straight away, I went to work opening Tesla Electric Company. Next, I went to work with George Westinghouse on the power project, Niagara Falls. Now, this was not just any power project. We were going to use alternating current and crush that inventor Edison. We used hundreds of my new Graham dynamos to create a humongous plant for using alternating currents to send electricity all the way to Buffalo, New York. Then I started on magic. I stunned crowds by spinning a metal egg on tables. I even propelled 1 million volts of electricity through my own body. I dazzled hundreds of people with my fluorescent lights. I had 40 patents for all the new technology. I spent millions of dollars on 2 grandiose towers. I wanted to make wireless transmission power, but I failed. By then, J.P. Morgan was not happy. My life ended in New York City, a poor man, but a major electrical engineer. On January 7th, 1943, of heart thrombosis. My life, jobs, and inventions revealed that I was ingenious. If I had become an Orthodox preacher, like my father, the United States would not have experienced cell phones, radio, electricity as we know it today. What can I say except you're welcome?
I am one of the most respected people in American history. I had many achievements in my life, like writing, boxing, and more. I lived 60 years and was president for 8 years. I will tell you about my early life, the Rough Riders, and my presidency. In 1903, I extensively designed Yellowstone National Park. Diligently, I drafted the park from scratch. It took me 6 months to get Yellowstone done. When I was a child, I had many hideous problems, such as head pain, asthma, and many of my family members also had horrible physical problems as well. I went to Abraham Lincoln's funeral. I had excellent memory and remember a lot from the past. I went to Harvard College when I was a teen. My father's name was Theodore Roosevelt Sr., so we had the same name. My mom's name was Martha Bulloch Roosevelt. I had 2 sisters. Their names are Bambi Roosevelt and Corina Roosevelt Robinson. My favorite food was the grilled cheese. When I was in my late teens, I enjoyed boxing. In May of 1898, I joined the Rough Riders. We were a group of volunteers who were miners, cowboys, law enforcement officials, and more. We were very much known to the people for fighting the battle Cuba made that were during the Spanish-American War. I was the leader in the fight. In the fights, we started in 1898 with 490 men, and then at the end of the group, we had 404 Rough Riders alive. But then the government took all of our gear of the Rough Riders. So I and the rest of the people that were in the group said goodbye. We only fought for 1 year, and a few years later, I wanted to be president of the United States of America. We had a passion to help America. I greatly known throughout America because of the way I led my life. I wanted to make America great, but my story does not end there. In 1882, I did become President of the United States. I was at the age of 42, and I am the youngest president ever in the United States of America. I even ran for another term when before the speech, a disturbed man crazy shot me before the speech. But I still successfully gave the speech. I said back to him, it takes more than that to kill a moose. During my time in office, I also started the Food and Drug Administration. I saw a lot of banks closing and wanted to make a change to it. And so I closed down the banks, and I encouraged the Federal Reserve to help me with the banks, and they did. And then banks were open again. And then I was nicknamed the Trust Buster. My favorite gun was the Winchester. It was an excellent gun, and it was lever action. I am one of the most well-known people in this country. Sorry. The teddy bears were named after me because the teddy was in the name. I have been alive for 60 years, but what I did not do is get on a dollar bill. My name is Teddy Roosevelt, and I lived from 1858 to 1919.
Famous aeronautic expansion. With a wonderful mother that taught me how to tinker and an unusual toy that my father gave me, excellent ideas started to grow in my mind. What if I was actually able to construct a flying machine that a person could ride in? As my brother and I worked in our bicycle shop, we started to invent different wing designs and soon realized that the dream could become a reality. Orville Wright was born on August 19, 1871 in Dayton, Ohio. I had an amazing mother named Susan that taught me and my siblings how to fix things, use tools, cook, and also sew. When I was 7 years old, my dad bought us a toy helicopter that was powered by a rubber band. When we saw it fly, it gave my brother Wilbert and I a wonderful idea to build a model flying machine and hope to one day construct an actual life-size one. I loved to take things apart and build them back up, and I also enjoyed designing kites. My friends were so impressed by my abilities that they brought several kites from me. Defying gravity was a true passion of mine really early on, as you can tell. When I was 21 years old, my brother and I opened a bicycle shop. Together, we fixed and improved these two-wheeled vehicles. I closely followed the world news on anything that flew, such as hot air balloons, gliders, or other flapping wing machines. I finally built our first glider, and it was a great success. With the main goal to actually have a person in the glider, I needed a lot more wind to help me with the lift. So, after studying the weather patterns of the eastern part of the United States, my brother and I settled on Kitty Hawk, which it was apparently not only a wonderful small fishing town on the coast of North Carolina, but also had plenty of wind to help with our endeavor. A few Triumph short flights gave me enough encouragement to return home to improve the original design of the glider. I continued to work for 2 years to better the conception of the wings, adding a rudder and elevators. My brother Wilbert and I returned to North Carolina for testing in 1902.
Incredibly, for the first time, I finally flew even though I ended up crashing. After a couple more tries, the longest record of 550 feet in 26 seconds was set. Joyfully, I returned to the drawing board, my ultimate goal being for the flying machine to actually be powered. The flyer was finally created in 1903, and its first propelled flight lasted 12 seconds. December 17th was the day this monumental accomplishment happened. My brother and I continued improving all the components of the airplane, and we did our first show for everybody to observe in Paris in 1908. We became instantly famous with what the newspaper called the Great White Bird. I lost my brother a few years later, and my heart was not in the airplane business anymore. He and I had shared the same dream of flying, and we were excited to have accomplished it. I continued to serve in the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, who also looked for ways to improve flight, but it was never the same again after losing my right-wing man. With a love of tinkering that helped open a successful bicycle shop, I ultimately thrived to take inventions to new heights. My love for flying objects enabled me to create the first powered airplane. As a pioneer of this new mode of transportation, I became famous in the aeronautic expansion.
Just a few mid-program notes. First of all, we're bumping up the intermission just by one student. I failed to introduce myself, apparently. My name is Shannon Wilson, and I am one of the essentials teachers here at Classical Conversations. I teach a class of 16 students, and Julie Sisk teaches the other class of 16 students. I think it's notable that in this current climate, homeschool and charter schools and all varieties of school that are not traditional are just busting at the seams. So we have 2 completely full classes of essentials totaling 32 students. And we're really happy to see some free market economy take on education for once. No more comments on that, but we will give you 5 minutes to just have a brief break, and then we will return with FDR. Thank you.
Hello.
Oh. If I could have your attention, we're going to resume.
I pledge myself to a new deal for the American people. With these very words, I, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, demolished my opponent, Herbert Hoover, losing only 6 states during my first presidential election in 1932. Many thought I would use my power to make the rich, like myself, richer. But no, sir, from my very first step into politics to my last, my goal and devotion was to making America a better home for everyone. But before I finish the story, first, let me begin. Born on January 30th, 1882, to Sarah and James Roosevelt, I, an only child, was the center of my parents' universe. Both my mother and father, who was almost twice her age, came from wealthy families. This allowed for a lavish lifestyle, including homeschooling by multiple governesses and endless outdoor adventures. I relished riding horses, swimming, and anything else outside of my competitive father, whom I called Popsy. But at age 14, with high hopes of me becoming a wealthy gentleman, my parents shipped me off to the prestigious Grand Episcopal boarding school. I struggled to fit in there as I did not excel in sports. But all of that changed when my cousin, Theo came to speak. Opposite my parents' beliefs, Theo encouraged me towards politics as a gentlemanly future, thus influencing the course of my next 40 years. I graduated from Harvard and started Columbia Law School in 1904 and married Eleanor the following year. I joined a Wall Street law firm but found it quite boring, so I did the only logical thing. I quit and ran headfirst into politics. I was heavily influenced by the progressive ideals of my Republican cousin, Teddy, who in his day stood up to corporate America, broke up countless monopolies, and had promoted a square deal for the working class. In 1912, I backed up Woodrow Wilson for president. Although I did agree with his ideas, I was a politician. And let's be honest, we usually have selfish motives. I was secretly hoping to receive a position in Washington. Sure enough, the following year, I became Assistant Secretary of the Navy, an important role during World War I. 7 years later, I ran for Vice President with partner James M. Cox. We lost big, but the race itself fueled a desire in me to run again someday. I continued my path in politics until August 1921, when tragedy struck. After a leisurely family swim one afternoon, I experienced a formidable back pain, and by the following day was unable to stand. Several doctors insisted it was just a cold, but eventually a specialist Eleanor brought in from Massachusetts diagnosed me with polio. I would never walk again. This devastating news should have been enough to end my career, but it only drove me harder. I tried everything from sun lamps to electric belts and even for hanging from the ceiling, but nothing worked. That is until I discovered and eventually purchased the Warm Springs Hotel in Georgia. The tepid 90-degree water was like a blanket to my bones, and the water's buoyancy allowed me the independent feeling of walking. Warm Springs became a home for myself and several others afflicted with this crippling disease. It was my retreat, my place of refuge, which would become especially important during my soon approaching 13 years as president. In 1931, 10 years after polio drastically changed my life, I was serving as governor of New York. The Wall Street stock market had recently crashed, and the American people were tired, hopeless, and desperate for change. My perseverance through my paralysis made me the perfect candidate to take on this grueling task. On March 4th, 1933,
I was sworn into office and immediately laden with the weight of the Great Depression. We helped the 12 million unemployed men acquire jobs planting forests, building fire stations, hospitals, schools, and other public buildings. We assisted farmers with selling crops and paying mortgages. We brought electricity to rural areas in 7 southern states and developed Social Security for the elderly, disabled, and needy children. It was expensive, and to this day, no one truly knows if it was the best idea. But enough people agreed with the plan because in 1936, I was reelected for a second term. Up until then, presidents had only served 2 terms. However, my 3rd and 4th terms came during World War II. Most Americans felt the U.S. would be more stable in maintaining its existing leadership during this hectic and horrific time of war. From the Great Depression and New Deal to the World Wars and the formation of the United Nations, my presidency required unparalleled grit and stamina. Although one might be quick to think it was my privileged childhood that paved the way for my infamous career in politics, it was actually my trials with polio and paralysis that shaped my character and developed the strength I would need to lead this country.
How many 12-year-old girls do you know who were scheduled to sail the Titanic with their parents until their father changed his mind at the last minute? This life-changing event is part of my family history and remains a tiny blip of my fairy tale life. Can you guess who I am? America's princess, Cornelia Stuyvesant Vanderbilt, and this is my story. My formidable lifestyle had been determined early on by my great-grandparents and their hard-working efforts. Because of perseverance, I procured quite a unique family history, a lovely upbringing, and adventurous adulthood. This combination of a simple upbringing, extravagant pastime, were a match made in heaven for my parents. My mother, Edith Stuyvesant Dresser, had been one of the 5 Dutch children living in the Dresser, Rhode Island home. When she was 10 years old, she lost both parents within months of each other. Her grandmother took over raising the children and moved them to New York City. Although Edith's family was not wealthy, they carried a grand family name, Peter Stuyvesant, who had been the historic governor of New Hampshire, which was later renamed New York, who had been a family ancestor. This Stuyvesant name served them well when money could not. In 1888, when Benjamin Harrison had been elected president, Bell Telephone Company was a year old, Van Gogh was perfectly painting sunflowers, Tchaikovsky was composing Sleeping Beauty, my mother moved to New York at the age of 15. Across town, another New Yorker, aged 25, grew tired of the bitter winters and began developing a new venture. My father, George Washington Vanderbilt, had been the youngest of his family and the grandson of Cornelius Commodore, the Commodore Vanderbilt. This cutthroat Commodore had been a famous tycoon of the industrial age. When my great-grandfather Cornelius was a teenager, his mom paid him $100 to clear some land. The Commodore bought a run-down old John boat and started a ferry service to Manhattan. The ferry service steamrolled into steamliners, into railroad investments, into railroad lines, into building Grand Central Station. My scrappy young sailor great-grandfather eventually surpassed Manhattan's richest millionaire, John Jacob Astor. The combination of a simple upbringing and extravagant pastime created a powerful match. Traveling made my heart grow fonder for my parents. While traveling on a steamliner to Europe, my parents met, courted in Paris, and were abroad in 1898. They returned to United States. They moved to my father's French chateau, the Biltmore, in the mountains of Asheville, North Carolina. The 175,000 square foot home covered 4 acres, breathtaking in both design and landscape. My father's castle was a topic of frequent conversations nationwide. Not only did the architecture surpass the current time, but the landscape had been designed to create vast European settings. The extravagant interior of the home dripped with priceless art and antiques. Extravagant became my norm. When I was born in August 1900, I was born immediately immersed and privileged. For my baptism, for example, I had been given 10 wicker carriages. My years living at the Biltmore were filled with many days spent in the great outdoors, and I loved fishing with my mother. Exploring the 125,000 acres with my dad proved much joy.
riding horses daily with friends, swimming in the front fountain on a hot day, getting lost in the secret doors of the house, and playing with our St. Bernard Cedric were many highlights of my childhood. I loved parties, and I would follow my mom's footsteps as welcoming host and event planner. My favorite birthday present was given to me the year I turned 10. I was given a donkey Jack, which I rode every day when I was 14. Every day. When I was 14 years of age, my life tragically changed. My father passed away suddenly from a post-surgical complication. He was 51 years old. Although I'm tall and slender like my mother, I carry my dad's legacy of dark hair and fine features. Upon his death, I inherited the estate. During that time, my heart grew fonder, filling my dad's footsteps through traveling and art. Because I longed to live differently than what I was considered appropriate for my family's incredible wealth, I've been called a bohemian. I was my father's daughter, and I love art. In my late teens and early 20s, I spent years at boarding school in Washington, D.C., University of North Carolina. At the age of 21, I began receiving my yearly allowance of $2 million. When I turned 25, I received my full inheritance of $50 million. Within the same few years, I met an Englishman and fell deeply in love, to John Francis Elmer Cecil. After our elaborate wedding and honeymoon, he returned with me to the Biltmore and started a new adventure in dairy farming. My firstborn son, George, was born in 1925. Currently in America during this time, the jazz age had been booming. I had been enthralled by the 1920s freedom, jazz, cigarettes, and speakeasies. My pocketbook made it easy to live. My second son, William, was born in 1928. My travels became more frequent and spent more time in New York focusing on art than at home. My desire for a new life finally led me to finalize a separation from Cecil and move me to Paris. In my new settings, I dyed my hair pink to dim the glare of the spotlight and to disappear into the French culture. Although Cecil and I divorced, we maintained joint custody of the boys. He remained at the Biltmore to manage the estate. Regardless of my family's wealth, my bohemian lifestyle kept me away from the Biltmore. I left my mountain home where I grew up to be a woman, and I changed my name to never return again to Asheville, North Carolina. My father's beloved Biltmore father's beloved Biltmore. I spent the rest of my life in England in the village of Churchill, until I died at the age of 75. Despite the vast ocean between us, I have never fully outlived the Vanderbilt name, nor my family legacy. Because of my family's perseverance, I procured quite extravagant wealth for which I have been thankful.
Can you believe that my classmates voted me least likely to succeed? I guess I can't blame them since I never took life seriously. I like nonsense. It wakes up the brain cells. My book inspired generations of children to read, and my words are still quoted frequently by many today. Surprisingly, creating advertisements for bug spray jump-started my career. While I started out as a cartoonist, I soon became one of the most popular children's book writers of the 20th century. I think you will agree that not only did I succeed, I moved mountains. I was born Theodore Seuss Geisel on March 2nd, 1904. However, most people know me as Dr. Seuss. I met Helen Palmer, who would be my future wife, while attending Oxford College in England. When she playfully remarked that I should be an illustrator, it changed my life. My huge break came in 1928. I began sketching advertisements for a pest company called Flit. Excitedly, I drew people in hilarious situations being attacked by monstrous bugs. At 27 years old, I was making $12,000 a year, which was a lot of money at the time. Working for Flit made me financially secure for the rest of my life. Life was very good. But that's not really what you remember me for. I was on my way to becoming the doctor you know and love. Ironically, I never had any biological children of my own. You make 'em, I'll amuse 'em, I used to say. In 1937, I published my first book, And to Think That I Saw It on Mulberry Street. Unbelievably, the book was initially rejected by 27 publishers. Boy, did they miss out. In 1957, I published The Cat in the Hat, which sold over 1 million copies in 3 years. That same year, I wrote How the Grinch Stole Christmas, When a friend bet me $50 I couldn't write a book using only 50 words, I accepted the challenge. Obviously, I succeeded, because in 1960, I wrote and illustrated Green Eggs and Ham. It was exactly 50 words and remains the most popular of my books, as well as the 4th best-selling children's book of all time. Sometimes I regret taking that bet, because all the banquets I attended after that put green eggs and ham on the menu. Oh well, the kids liked it. Even in my later years, I was innovative. My writing was fun, but I also used it to teach life lessons. Yoda the Turtle was based on Hitler, who was a tyrant and a brave little turtle that stands up to him. During the Civil Rights Movement, I wrote The Sneetches and other stories because I thought it was silly for people to judge one another for being different. The Lorax, which spoke about protecting the environment, was written in 1989. The logging industry got really upset with me about that book. Can you believe they wanted to take it off the school reading lists? I wasn't against logging or industry. I just wanted to bring attention to the greed that was destroying our environment. In 1984, the Butter Battle book made people angry because it spoke about the nuclear arms race in the Cold War. Although it was controversial, it was my first children's book to stay on the adult bestseller list for 6 weeks. Clearly, I was no longer writing just for children, but for all humanity. I became the first children's book author to receive the Pulitzer Prize in 1984. In 1990, Oh, the Places You'll Go summed up my views on life. It was my grand finale. Sadly, for most of my life, I was a heavy smoker. In fact, I never broke the habit. When a dentist discovered cancer in my mouth, I knew it was a poor prognosis. I took my final breath on September 24, 1991, at age 87. I requested no funeral and no grave, yet millions still mourn me. During my career, I wrote 40 books. 24 of those books landed on the top 150 best-selling children's books of all time. I introduced generations of children to the wonders of reading through humor, wonderful tales, and a different perspective. And did I succeed? I believe I did indeed. It was 98 3/4% guaranteed. I moved mountains, and so will you.
He looks like a fat little Dutchman, but who knows? He might someday become president, my father exclaimed on my birthday. My renowned and revered name is Ronald Wilson Reagan. At first, I hated the name Ronald and was nicknamed Dutch. But when I became a movie star, I changed back to Ronald Reagan because Dutch was unprofessional. I was also known as a great communicator when I worked as a radio host. I was brought into the world in Tampico, Illinois, on February 6, 1911. Since I moved countless times, I never made close friends. From 1926 to 1932, I became the first lifeguard of my town, Dixon. After I served as a radio host, I dreamed of Hollywood. I successfully starred in 53 movies, which helped me eventually win the governorship of California. Fervently, my friends finally convinced me to run for President of the United States. From 1926 to 1932, I painstakingly worked as a lifeguard. Because I heard of drownings and swam swift and strong, I volunteered as the first lifeguard of my town. During my time guarding, I was paid $15 a week, which amounted to a huge sum during the Great Depression. I watched from 10 in the morning to 10 at night. I worked tirelessly. Because I saved a countless number of people, my father suggested that I record all of my rescues on a log by making little notches. There were 77 saved at the end of my lifeguarding job. I always did have a flair for the dramatic. Sometimes, when I would heroically save a person, it was recorded in the Dixon local newspaper. In some ways, the job had inevitable drawbacks. Mischievous and silly, swooning, star-eyed girls would pretend to drown, so I would save them. Occasionally, I did not just lifeguard, I would also teach children how to swim. While the river was a formidable and treacherous terrain to swim in, that did not stop people of all ages jumping in to splash about or swim. During my 6 years guarding, there was not one who had drowned. I was a lifeguard to remember. I started to dream of Hollywood. After working as a lifeguard, I found a job as a radio host at WHO with Hands Open, but I had always dreamed of starring in movies. Most people agreed that I was an excellent host with intriguing dialogue and perfect memory. One day, I met the movie star, Joy Starr, who helped me obtain a meeting with a movie producer. Fortunately, in 1937, a telegram arrived from my agent announcing that he could sign a $200 a year contract for me. Quickly, I telegraphed back to him, sign it before they change their minds, stop. But not an A-list actor, I starred as the lead role in Love is on the Air as a witty meteorologist. That first year, I starred in 8 movies. I gradually grew famous. I was most
famous for George Gipp and Newt Rockne All-American, which I authored. As George Gipp, at the end of the movie, I had an emotional and stirring speech as I died to win one for the Gipper, which, when it first premiered, moved people to tears. Later, I attained a contract of a whopping $1 million a year. From 1937 to 1966, I started 53 films. Looking back, if only I would have known what Hollywood would lead me to. Though at first I was a liberal Democrat, I eventually changed my views as I saw what communism could do. I became conservative Republican and ran for governor of California. Because of my Hollywood roots, I won. After my 2 terrific terms from 1960 to 1968, when the Republicans realized what I could do for my state, they begged me to run for president. For a long time, I held fast, not wanting to run. But eventually, as they kept nagging me, I changed my mind. I gave in. In 1976, I inevitably ran against Gerald Ford for the Republican nomination. Although I lost, this gave me a rising interest in politics. Renewing my interest and resolve, in 1980, I, Ronald Wilson Reagan, ran for the office of president and won the Republican nomination against George Bush, who had become my vice president. My slogan, "Let's Make America Great Again," helped me and helped me win, helped another significant president in 2016. I was especially loved in South Carolina and in other southern states such as Georgia and Florida, who appreciated a poor boy who worked hard. I won! On January 21st, 1981, I became the 40th President of the United States. I am proud to say that I am, without a doubt, one of the most prominent presidents to ever take the oath of office. While they had challenges from Republicans and especially Democrats, I maintained the ability to make peace with all. From 1926 to 1932, I, Dutch Reagan, worked as a lifeguard crew member. While not my most significant job, it gave me a chance to show that I could work. I became an actor and starred in 53 movies, and ironically, Hollywood helped me win the governorship of California. As well as being the governor, I ran and won as a Republican candidate for the President of the United States. Becoming a president of this great nation was a highlight of my life. Serving as a commander-in-chief was a massive honor. Zach Reagan, my dad was correct. A fat Dutchman can become president.
Picture this. It's a Monday evening in New York City. You want to go shopping, but the stores have closed early, and you can't seem to find a taxi anywhere. Families have rushed to their dinner, and kids have scrambled to finish their homework. What's going on? Is a storm coming? A war? COVID? No. All this commotion is actually related to a 30-minute comedy show, starring me, Lucille Ball. I was born on August 6, 1911, in Jamestown, New York. My father, an electrician, helped to put telephone poles throughout the country. We were a happy family until tragedy struck in 1915, and we lost my father to typhoid fever. Now alone, my pregnant mother and I were forced to move back to New York, where my mother remarried Ed Peterson. Unfortunately, he was not fond of young children, especially energetic fireballs like myself. So we convinced my mother to send me to live with my grandparents, where I was also responsible for helping raise my younger cousins. Around ages 10 and 11, I worked at different odd jobs to assist with income. I even worked at an ice cream station until I was fired for always forgetting the banana and the banana split. That's about the time when I was reunited with my mother and evil stepfather. Although I was quite shy, I convinced them to enter me in drama school. Sadly, after the first 6 weeks, the school sent a letter to my mother informing her that she was wasting her money, and I had no future as an actress. But I kept trying. After 7 difficult years as trying to make it in New York, I was given an audition with a group of women at Goldman Studios in California. While the Mr. Goldman was intently studying each of our looks, I took a risk and made him laugh. And that, folks, was the true beginning of my infamous career as the first lady of comedy. Speaking of firsts, I had a lot of them in show business. At age 29, I met and married Cuban band leader Desi Arnaz. We had such a fun and energetic chemistry that I insisted he play my on-screen husband in my most beloved show, I Love Lucy. This was the first time an interracial couple would exist on TV, and therefore no studio supported the idea. It was hard, but led to the great decision to make our own studio, Desilu Productions. At the peak of our show's fame, I discovered I was expecting a baby. Again, a woman had never been pregnant on TV, but we took another risk and wrote the pregnancy into the script.
We even worked my baby Lucy's birth into one show, and I became the first lady filmed on the same day as having a baby. I was pretty tired that night. Although Desi and I seemed as happy as ever on screen, our marriage struggled in real life and we divorced in 1960. I bought his share of our company and became the first woman to run her own production studio. And after all those firsts, I eventually became the first lady ever to receive an International Radio and TV Award. My life was filled with many television performances and even Broadway, but nothing ever topped the funny and famous memories created on I Love Lucy. From eating chocolates off a speed conveyor belt to drinking too much medicine for a TV commercial, and even almost drowning in a huge container of grape juice. Our show brought more laughs to Americans than anything before. We set the record for world's longest laugh in one show. Even more amazing, our show often caused a huge drop in water pressure in cities across America because everyone would wait until the show was over to use the restroom. Although I lived in a somewhat rough childhood, it taught me how to work hard and take risks. And in the end, those risks led to my biggest career achievements, and it made me a woman of many firsts. People need laughter. I repeat, in a world full of sorrow, death, and division, people need laughter. And for a short time, I, Lucille Ball, was honored to provide just that.
Did you know that wily means clever? Interestingly, the genius that created me gave me the name Wile E. Coyote. He couldn't have picked a better name for me because I am very cunning. By the way, I know you all are wondering the same thing. The answer is yes. I will be here later to sign autographs. For now, let me tell you a little more about the man who lived through the golden age of animation, who had many great achievements, and to whom I owe my existence. As a child, Charles Martin Jones dreamed of being an artist, better known as Chuck.
Sorry.
Keep going. Did you hear the first part?
Did you hear the first part?
Okay. I'll start with a word. He couldn't have picked a better name for me because I am very cunning. By the way, I know you all are wondering the same thing. The answer is yes. I will be here later to sign autographs. For now, let me tell you a little more about the man who lived through the golden age of animation, who had many great achievements, and to whom I owe my existence. As a child, Charles Martin Jones dreamed of being an artist. Better known as Chuck, he was born... He was born in Spokane, Washington on September 21st, 1912. He grew up in Hollywood when few people had radios and television did not exist. His father, who would not let him talk at breakfast, only allowed reading. When Chuck forgot to bring a book to the table, his dad made him read the cereal box. Frankly, he could read at 3 years old. Reading complex books and hearing amazing tales made him happy. Since he loved to draw, most days he would create at least 20 pictures. When he reached his high school years, Chuck's father enrolled him at Shinar Art Institute in Los Angeles. Chuck gained the skills to be a real artist and follow his dreams. At 18 years old, Chuck got a job in an animation studio. Art school had prepared him well for a career in animation. Sadly, the studio struggled to make a profit and was eventually fired. His next job was in downtown Los Angeles drawing portraits. He made $1 per portrait and also made a little extra money helping the puppeteers. Chuck was struggling to pay his bills. Thankfully, he was hired by Leon Schlesinger Productions, which later became Warner Brothers. At age 25, he became the youngest animation supervisor in the business. He worked on Looney Tunes and Merry Melodies cartoons. From the 1930s and 1960s, this era was known as the golden age of animation. And Chuck was living his dream while Chuck directed his first feature in 1938 called Night Watchman. He had other accomplishments. Roadrunner and I appeared in 26 cartoons, which Chuck directed over the next 16 years. The Fast and the Furious was my first appearance, and I must say, I was magnificent. Chuck also added new and interesting personalities to existing characters, such as Daffy Duck, Bugs Bunny, and Elmer Fudd. One of his greatest achievements, other than me, was the dot in the line. For that, he won an outstanding award in 1965. 1 year later, he directed the television version of Dr. Seuss's How the Grinch Stole Christmas. By the way, it was Chuck's idea to make the Grinch green. Before that, the Grinch was black and white with pink eyes. Yikes! In 1992, What's Opera Doc made classical music fun for children. Many agreed it was the masterpiece of Chuck's career. His accomplishments, which were many, did not stop there. Chuck received an honorary Oscar in 1996 at age 83 for his lifetime achievements animation. The crowd gave him a standing ovation in 2001. Chuck was inducted into the Animation Hall of Fame in Los Angeles. 1 year later, at age 89, he died of heart failure. Chuck's goal was to make people laugh through his art. I think he achieved that goal and will be remembered as a great animator for generations to come. I owe him my existence, and someday I will catch that rascal Roadrunner. Now, about those autographs.
I experienced many extraordinary events in my life. I began my life as a dairy farmer in North Carolina. At 16, I became a young teenager committed to Christ. I'm most known for preaching the gospel all over the globe. You know me as Billy Graham. What God accomplished. During my childhood, I was taught not to complain, to speak the truth, and to live wisely. But I did not become a Christian until I was a teen. The Great War ended the week I was born. As a country boy, my nickname was Billy Frank, short for Billy Franklin. Every morning, I woke up at 2:30 to wake up the farmhands. Before, I would milk 20 cows in 2 hours. But I wasn't lonely. My large red goat, Billy Jr., kept me company. My two grandpas fought in the Civil War, which my grandma Coffee told me much about, including how her husband had lost both an eye and a leg. One day, when I was 12 years old, I was pulled out of school quite early
for my grandma was expected to die that day. She was sleeping, and I could not talk to her. Suddenly, when she was near death, she sat up in her bed with her arms stretched wide and said, "I see Jesus and Ben has both eyes and legs. They're coming to get me." Then she fell back in her bed, and she was dead. I had learned that the Bible was true. My grandma coffee inspired me to know the Lord because she saw him in person. My childhood on the farm paved the way for me to hear God's call. Before I reached adulthood, I heard God's call on my life. Evangelist Mordecai Ham was coming to Charlotte for 11 weeks of preaching. When I heard Dr. Ham start to preach, it was fiery and enthusiastic. After I attended the first meeting, I returned night after night, coming to the realization that I was sinful and, in a word, spiritually dead. I felt as if Ham was speaking straight towards me and looking straight at me. When it came time for the nightly invitation of salvation, I stood up and walked straight towards the platform. I had to commit myself to Christ. After that night, I wanted to go to church. I experienced harassment from old friends who mocked me as preacher boy. The first time I shared my testimony to a group, I felt embarrassed and swore I would never do that again. Thus, I never could imagine the career God had for me. What God accomplished through me affected many people. Eventually, I preached to 200 million people in 185 different countries. Sharing the gospel was my central focus. My career started in 1943 after I graduated from Wheaton College and began to preach at Village Church. At first, there were 50 people attending, and in a few short months, attendance doubled. Then a unique opportunity was presented, and because of a generous church member, we were able to broadcast our Sunday night sermons across the Midwest. Village Church grew even more. Later, I became a full-time employee for Youth for Christ, an evangelist organization that sought young people. Before I knew it, I was preaching like Dr. Mordecai Ham. I was becoming famous, and my schedule was filling up. There were some persistent people who were repetitively requested that I do a weekly national broadcast. I did not believe I had time, so I refused them each time they asked. When they were finally leaving one night, I unexpectedly told them, "If I get $25,000 before midnight, I'll do the broadcast." At the end of the crusade, I found myself with $24,000 of donations, $1,000 short. Back at my hotel, I found 2 checks in my room, each one worth $500. Then I knew the Lord wanted me to do the radio show. This is when I founded the Billy Graham Evangelistic Association. The BGEA aimed to use money donated for the spread of the gospel. Getting rich was never my goal, but preaching the gospel was. So I resolved to merely take a salary from the BGEA. By 1950, I had already preached to 1,500,000 people and was gaining fame as an effective evangelist. God used this fame to spread the gospel around the world. I went to heaven in 2018 after living my life wholeheartedly for the Lord Jesus Christ.
Have you ever heard of someone from a big city who was barely affected by the Great Depression? From my time as the child of an actress during the Depression to my later years after my husband's presidency, I never knew what it was like to be poor. Yet my life was interesting because of my dreams of acting, having a family, and being First Lady. Being the daughter of an actress and a neurosurgeon, I led a privileged life. Although you know me as Nancy Reagan, my original name was Anne Frances Robbins. Born in New York City, where my mother, Edith Luckett Robbins, was an excellent actress, I was instantly nicknamed Nancy. I lived my early elementary years with my aunt and uncle, attending private school in Washington, D.C. While my mother was busy acting, when my beautiful mother got remarried to a wealthy man named Lowell Davis, I moved to live with them where I was happiest. During the Depression, most of the nation infamously suffered, but I was hardly affected and enjoyed entertaining and acting in plays for my mother's friends. In the event of World War II, I volunteered at the hospitals to care for our soldiers. Later, with my mom's connections, it was only natural for me to acquire a job in Broadway and then onto Hollywood to fulfill my dreams of acting in films. Hollywood was the place I met Ronald Reagan. 2 years after I met Ronald, he and I were married, eager to start a family of our own. I struggled to keep my family the top priority while acting. Ronald and I acted in our last film together in 1960 so I could be home with our 2 children, Patty and Ron Jr. As a mother and a housewife, I also enjoyed getting involved in charities, where I made lifelong friends. In the eventful year of 1966, Ron became governor of California. Naturally, we moved to Sacramento, where my adjustment was gradual. With the governor's mansion being in disrepair, I moved my family to a home nearby, even though people criticized me for this seemingly snobby choice. While First Lady of California, I paired children with older mentors through the foster grandparent program and visited the wounded Vietnam soldiers. The biggest surprise during my time as First Lady of our state was announced while Ron was still governor. Though you knew I would become the First Lady of the United States, you probably did not realize my husband forgot to tell me first. One day, while listening to the radio, I heard Ron's name listed as a presidential candidate. I cannot say I thought it was funny. I am most remembered for being First Lady during my husband's presidential terms. As First Lady, I was criticized for my spending habits. In response to this, at the Gridiron Dinner one year, I snuck off and donned mismatched attire to perform a solo singing second-hand clothes to the critical journalists who were present. This laughable stunt made me more popular in the eyes of the American people. While the Cold War raged, someone tried to assassinate Ronald. This event caused me much stress, but thankfully, Ron recovered. As First Lady, my platform was Just Say No, a program I created to teach children to just say no to drugs. During Ron's presidency, I also went through cancer. I faced it aggressively with my focus on getting back to my responsibilities. In 1989, Ron and I retired. Remaining committed to Ron and facing criticism with humor helped me to get through these challenging 8 years. My dreams of acting, my desire to have a family, and my times as First Lady are some of the themes of my life. I steadfastly loved and respected my husband. I hope I'm remembered for my lifelong desire to help people and my constant involvement in charities.
He is no fool who gives what he cannot keep to gain what he cannot lose. I wrote these words in my journal before I knew I would fulfill them myself. During my childhood, my family had multiple missionary friends who sparked my interest in becoming a missionary. Diligently, I prepared myself to serve God through ministering to his people. A group of missionaries assembled with me to share the word of God with the Auca Indians, who ruthlessly killed all outsiders. God accomplished His plans for the Auca Indians through my life and my death. God prepared me to be a missionary. I was born on October 8th, 1927 in Portland, Oregon. I attended Wheaton College, and while I was there, I met a brilliant woman named Elizabeth Howard, the daughter of 2 missionaries. Because I calculated around 76,800 people died worldwide each day without knowing Christ, I had a strong desire to preach the gospel in Ecuador. I had to act. While in a Bible study, I met Pete Fleming, who decided to accompany me on my zealous journey to South America. Before we entered the missions field, we moved to Quito for a year to learn Spanish. We traveled to a Quichua settlement where Elizabeth and I were married in front of only 2 other missionaries. Proudly, we had a girl named Valerie. I was prepared by God to enter the missions field and confidently preach the gospel to the Quichua and Auca Indians. Elizabeth and I, the McCulleys, the Udurians, the Flemings, and the Saints, all worked separately as missionaries to the Quichua Indians, but God brought us together to preach the gospel to the Aucas. We called it Operation Auca. Sadly, the Auca Indians had no contact with the outside world and had never heard the gospel. The tribe mercilessly murdered all outsiders, but ministering to them was worth the risk. Our endeavor to deliver captivating gifts to the Aucas was accomplished by dangling a bucket from a plane and flying in tight circles until the bucket reached the ground. When the Aucas sent gifts back, we concluded it was time to meet them face to face. Nate Saint, who piloted the gift drops, landed on a sandbar which we dubbed Palm Beach. In the midst of Auca territory on Palm Beach, we built a treehouse to live in. We had come together, risking our lives to share the gospel with the Auca Indians. God's purpose was being accomplished through us. On January 7th, 1956, we spotted Auca men moving toward the treehouse. Excitedly, I sprinted back to the house to radio our wives. They waited for some news about a remarkable encounter, but no call came. The next morning, a pilot was sent to fly over Palm Beach and found all 5 of us run through by Auca spears. My story does not stop here. Although we were buried on Palm Beach, Johnny Keenan, the pilot who first reported our deaths, continued the gift drops. Eventually, 2 Aucas came to the Quichua clearing where Elizabeth lived and asked for an Auca woman who had left their tribe years before. She became a Christian in her time away from the tribe and returned with the Aucas. Because she shared the gospel with them, more Aucas came and asked Elizabeth and Rachel, Nate Saint's sister, to teach them more about the God we serve. The Aucas came to Christ, ending the cycle of killing that had continued for generations. God accomplished his purpose through me to bring the truth of the gospel to the Aucas. I faithfully prepared to become a missionary. My friends and I assembled to share the truth with the Aucas. God accomplished his plans through me, my wife, and my friends. The world remembers me, Jim Elliott, as a hero who gave his life to share the gospel with that merciless tribe. I was willing to give my life on earth so others could live on after death. I was no fool, for I gave what I could not keep to gain what I could not lose.
All right, we're going to take an unprecedented break to catch a lizard. Thank you.
Yes.
One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. 6.5 million people heard me speak these words from the moon. I, Neil Armstrong, wanted to fly as a boy, piloted airplanes as a man, and walked on the moon as an astronaut. From a young age, I loved flying. A calm, serious, and determined boy was born on August 5th, 1930 in Ohio. When I was 6 years old, I flew for the first time in an airplane called the Tin Goose. My father felt scared, but I extremely enjoyed the flight. I liked to build airplane models and read magazines which described airplanes. I wanted to fly. Repeatedly, I climbed onto my neighbor's shed and looked through his homemade telescope. As a boy, I aspired to fly and see the stars. Finally, my dreams came true and I became a pilot. Flying lessons cost $9 an hour, so I had to work for a long time to purchase lessons. I earned my pilot's license when I was 16, but I was still too young to drive. When the Navy called me to the Korean War, I fought bravely as a fighter pilot. After the war, I became a test pilot at Edwards Air Force Base in California. I flew the rocket-propelled X-15, which bolted 4,000 miles per hour. It flew 50 miles above the Earth, which bordered space. I liked using airplanes as efficient tools to gather information. My dreams of flying finally came true. I became an astronaut and the first man on the moon. When I joined NASA in 1962, the extremely brutal training included the Vomit Comet, which flew very high and then dove. The first time I flew into space was in 1966 on the Gemini 8 mission. We were trying to dock with another spacecraft orbiting Earth, but we could not because our spacecraft started spinning end over end. In 1969, NASA made me commander of the Apollo 11 mission to the moon. Buzz Aldrin and Mike Collins joined me. We departed from planet Earth. On July 16, 1969, the Saturn V rocket launches 200,000 miles at 25,000 miles per hour to the moon. 4 days later, Buzz Aldrin and I perilously landed on the moon in the landing module called the Eagle. While we walked on the moon, we collected rocks, planted an American flag in the lunar soil, and left a plaque. The return trip took 60 hours. Successfully, we landed on July 24, 1969. I became a college professor and a farmer. I died on August 25, 2012. I was the first astronaut to step onto lunar soil. As a child, I wanted to fly. When I was 16, I became a pilot. Finally, in 1962, NASA wanted me to become an astronaut. People will remember the one small step I took that day in July. Forevermore, I leaped for the first time on the moon.
That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. Well, I'm not the one who said that. That was my friend Neil Armstrong. You might be wondering, who are you and what did you do? Well, my birth name is Edwin Eugene Aldrin, but you know me now as Buzz Aldrin, thanks to my sister. I was born January 20th, 1930 in Glen Ridge, New Jersey. My father, Edwin Sr., was an officer and pilot in the U.S. military. My mother, Marianne, raised my older sisters, Maddie, Fayanne, and I. My childhood was very active. I was a sports kind of guy. Football, pole vaulting, swimming, to name a few. But most of all, I liked to compete and win. My first airplane ride happened in 1932 when I was only 2 years old. It was a little scary, but I loved it. Ever since that first plane ride, I enjoyed talking to my father about flying, and I knew scientists were building rockets to go into space. I always dreamed of going higher and faster. When I was 17, I accepted going to the U.S. Military Academy at West Point. My goal was to be a pilot in the U.S. Air Force. I studied hard and graduated at the top of my class, always keeping my dream of going into space the reason for being the best. In 1951, I joined the Air Force and flew some of the fastest aircrafts at the time. I flew fighter jets such as the F-100 and earned a distinguished fly cross for my service in the Korean War. After serving in Germany, I returned home still dreaming of going higher and faster. Back home, I continued my studies and earned a doctorate degree. In 1963, I officially became a NASA astronaut. In 1966 was my first mission to space with James Lovell. In 1969, I was chosen to be a part of a new mission, Apollo 11. On July 16th, Neil Armstrong, Michael Collins, and I rocketed to space to be the first to land on the moon. It took us 3 days to get there. Collins stayed in the spacecraft Columbia orbiting the moon while Armstrong and I launched the spacecraft Eagle. We spent 4 hours putting on our spacesuits to be the first to set foot on the surface of the moon. It was beautiful, beautiful, magnificent desolation. As I described it to be 530 million people watching, I felt proud and kept dreaming of more explorations. After I worked at NASA almost 8 years, I logged 289 hours and 53 minutes in space. A few of my other expeditions were in a mini submarine to the ruins of the Titanic and an icebreaker ship to the North Pole. I gotta take this. Hello? It's Houston. They've got a problem.
Well, I'd love to stay in chat. It's time I head out on my next adventure.
On November 27th, 1940, as World War II raged on in Europe, I entered into the world in San Francisco, California. Born to Chinese parents, I received a traditional name which was Jun Fan. Of note, I was born in the hour and the year of the dragon. In Chinese culture, being born in the year of the dragon symbolizes confidence, courage, strength, and independence. True to Chinese folklore, I would come to be known as a brilliant philosopher and teacher, as well as one of the greatest action film stars the world has ever known. My family soon left California and traversed the Pacific Ocean back home to Hong Kong, China. My father, who was a popular actor, often took me to film sets. Because I was regularly on set, my first appearance in a film was at the tender age of 6. Like my father, I reveled in on-screen roles. As I grew, I continued to act in various roles, appearing in at least 20 films. Not only was I a talented actor, I was also gifted in other arts. I won several dancing competitions and was even known for poetry. While acting, dancing, and poetry kept me busy, I still fell into street fighting. At that time, Hong Kong had many dangerous gangs, and I'd often encounter these clans. Like most parents, mine became extremely worried and enrolled me in Kung Fu under an instructor named Yip Man. Diligently, I studied discipline and self-control from my master. Despite these self-protection measures, I continually encountered street gangs. Because of this, my parents decidedly sent me to the United States. At 18, I journeyed to America and enrolled in the University of Washington. Along with my studies, I began to teach martial arts, relishing in the opportunity to share my knowledge and gift with others. In 1963, I excitedly opened my first martial arts studio, which was one of the first to instruct in the secrets of martial arts to non-Orientals. Although I enjoyed instructing in martial arts, I longed for more for my life and family. Fervently, I worked to break into the American acting scene and landed a role in the Green Hornet as Kato, the crime-fighting chauffeur. According to directors, I moved so fast, they asked me to slow down so the cameras could see my actions. Although the Green Hornet was only on American television for one season, the show became extremely popular in China. I was a celebrity in my home country, finally propelling me into my acting career. Despite my success in China, I continually faced racism in America and was not granted any film roles. Not one to back down from a challenge, I remained steadfast in chasing my acting dream and soon was given the chance to shine. My first major role in an American film was in the movie called Enter the Dragon, in which I played an undercover agent for British intelligence. The movie was an extreme success, but tragedy soon befell me. One afternoon, as I was meeting with a fellow actor, I had a horrible headache and received medicine to ease the pain. Unfortunately, I had an allergic reaction and suddenly passed away in 1973 at the age of 32. During my short journey on Earth, I was able to open the doors for martial arts in the film world, while also becoming one of the greatest action film stars, as well as creating a new film genre.
philosophy, and martial arts. I became the #1 martial artist practitioner in the world and hoped my martial arts would combat racism between Eastern and Western cultures. I faced many stumbling blocks in life, but never allowed these to stop me, fulfilling my Chinese symbol of the dragon and earning me the nickname, the Immortal Dragon. I, Jun Fan, the Immortal Dragon, but most famously known as Bruce Lee, strongly believed, if you love life, don't waste time, for time is what life is made up of.
Pay attention to the people around, because I, Andrew Burleigh, challenge you to thank a veteran any opportunity you get. A sign of a veteran is a person wearing a hat or patch displaying their branch of service. Army, Navy, Marines, U.S. Air Force, or Coast Guard. Children. Interview grandparents, study history, visit a memorial. But of course, you know this already. You are already doing it, and I am mighty proud. Now let me tell you my story. William Andrew Burleigh was born on June 10, 1947, at Emory Hospital in Atlanta, and grew up in Marietta, Georgia. Most people call me Andy. Growing up on a farm, I was the middle of the pack with 3 brothers and 1 sister. On the farm, I helped with the animals, mowed the lawn, and weeded, watered, and planted in the garden. My father, Bruce Burleigh, who was a squadron surgeon in World War II, later worked as a doctor. And my mother, Billie Ann, was a nurse. On December 28, 1968, I married Margie Kemp, right after I expectedly was drafted for the Vietnam War. Being drafted meant that the government picked me through a random lottery, having no choice. I proudly accepted this, thinking it was my duty, because my family members had served before me. For 2 months in basic training camp, I completed physical fitness drills, which included running in weighted gear in the rain. I also attended flight school in Fort Walters, Texas, and Savannah, Georgia. In 1969, I finally left for war. I was 21 years old when I audaciously took on war. As I arrived in South Vietnam, I found the weather hot and sometimes rainy. South Vietnam needed our help against Ho Chi Minh and his North Vietnam communists. I missed everything about America: ice cream, Super Bowl, World Series, Margie, and the rest of the family. In B Troop 3rd Squadron, 17th Air Cavalry, I flew 2 different helicopters. I flew Hueys to transport soldiers. I flew OH-6s, which were light observation helicopters, to look for the enemy. Once I was flying and a metal piece of shrapnel pierced my hand. A second time, 10 days later, in an observation helicopter, I was painfully shot in my buttocks by an AK-47. After this, I figured out my chopper's fuel tank had been shot, and I had to land in the middle of a rice field because I feared the helicopter would explode. Because of these injuries, I was awarded a Purple Heart, a medal of recognition for those who have been wounded in combat. When I got back from war, I was happy, but anybody coming back from war is changed. In 2000, I visited the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, also known as the Wall, in Washington, D.C. The Wall is a shiny black granite memorial that has the names of American victims from Vietnam. It is organized by year, listing over 58,000 names of those who died fighting and those who were never found. Honestly, my first visit was memorable and somber. I could see that visitors put flags, flowers, and pictures in front of the names of their loved ones. The reason I went was to honor the people who died. When I found the names of my roommates, I would emotionally remember their faces and the experiences I had with them.
Today, I enjoy hanging out with my grandchildren, planting flowers, serving at Triple Tree Aerodrome, by landscaping and participating in fly-ins, and volunteering for just about anything. I also spend my time with friends from ASA, Atlantic Southeast Airlines, where I flew for 23 years. I am now 73 years old and have been back from Vietnam for 51 years. I often remember that one of my friends had a quote saying, "People who remember never truly die." Do you remember how I told you about my early life? Well, I admit that it seemed like a lifetime ago. My love for flying began in Vietnam and continues to this day. I appreciate the opportunities I have to share my story with my grandchildren and their friends. I'm thankful I returned from Vietnam and have the privilege to tell the stories of those who did not.
Hey girls, it's your universe too. Science isn't just a guy thing. Before my life, male domination ruled the United States. When Russia sent women into space, they still did not respect the female astronauts. Surprisingly, space missions in America consisted only of men. My childhood, space missions, and company changed history for women and girls in science. They changed me too. My name was Sally Kirstenride, and I was the first woman in space. I was born May 26, 1951, in Enrico, California. As a strong-willed, athletically inclined girl, I earned amazing grades, yet called myself an underachiever. Stubbornly, I also refused to feign interest in class if I was bored. I desired to play football with the boys because it looked so much fun, but my parents convinced me to play tennis instead. I rebelled against male animosity. When I graduated from high school, I attended Swarthmore University, which is in Pennsylvania, for a year and a half before homesickness drove me back to California. I resumed my studies at Stanford, and I graduated with a master's degree in English and a doctorate in physics. Soon, I would leave my home in Enrico, California. When I was accepted into NASA, I switched my studies from physics to engineering. I diligently built a robotic arm, which helped me to go on the first Challenger mission in 1983. The astronauts wanted to use my invention to deploy a satellite. The commander chose me because I was experienced with the tool. At age 31, I was the youngest person to break the Earth's atmosphere, as well as the first woman, shattering both the glass ceiling of male supremacy and the doubt that women could ever be astronauts. Ear-splitting booms. Gravity pulled me relentlessly. Then, the sensation of weightlessness. Bravely, I also blasted through NASA's glass ceiling in 1984 in the second Challenger mission. I was scheduled for a third mission, but the Challenger tragically exploded in the sky on January 28, 1986. I was devastated. 1 year later, in 1987, I retired from NASA. Switching from physics to engineering not only helped my progress when I joined NASA, but also assisted the birth of my company. In 2001, I founded a company, which I titled Sally Rides Science. I believe that you have to capture an interest that already exists to cultivate celestial curiosity. Hoping desperately for the students' welfare, I hosted science festivals on the campus of my company. At the end of each day, 800 to 1,000 girls were enthralled and intrigued with science. Instantaneously, the festivals helped smooth the bumps in society for middle school girls who were interested in science. I had a special passion for younger children and wrote many books about my travels in space. However, I was closed off about my personal life. As a result, when I became mortally ill with pancreatic cancer, I refused to let my company tell the world about it. Eventually, it killed me. My death occurred on July 23, 2012. The company that I continued to help until the end of my life was titled Sally Rides Science. As the first woman in space, my childhood, space missions, and company changed history for women and girls in science. When I desired to play football, I expressed frustration about male superiority. Thinking quickly, I chose to switch from physics to engineering when NASA accepted me into their program. Slowly, joining NASA changed my life. Then, in 2001, I created my company, Sally Rides Science, to try and feed the flames of interest in science among middle school girls. Shattering the glass ceiling on the first Challenger of NASA changed my life and the world significantly.
A lot of kids grow up playing catch or backyard baseball with their father. My situation was a little bit different. You see, when I was around 5 to 14, I would go to my dad's baseball games and watch him play in the MLB. My father played for the Cincinnati Reds. He played with MLB legends such as Pete Rose and Tony Pena. I have even watched the Reds at their best when they won a World Series in '76. All my memories at the various ballparks were not joyful. Probably one of the worst memories going to one of my dad's games is when my dad played for the Yankees. I went down to talk to him in the dugout like I always do before games, and the dugout manager said I had to get out. My father took a look around and saw another Yankees player hitting ground balls to his son. On the field, might I add. We grew furious, but my father knew that the dugout manager had the power to send security to get me out, so I had to get out. That didn't leave me down in the dumps. I worked very hard, and word spread that I had the potential to be better than my father. My first year in the minor leagues was the hardest time of my life because it seemed like all my friends and family were yelling at me. I became homesick. You were usually the talk of the town when you get drafted, but then you see everyone else who got drafted and realize they're the talk of the town too. Most of the time I was mad because of the people yelling at me, but I took my anger out on the baseball. My first year in the minors, my batting average was .314 with 14 homers and only 54 games. Back home in the off-season, the tension between me and my father only grew. Even though I knew my family and friends supported me, I emptied a bottle of aspirin swallowing 277 pills, and that's what I unthoughtfully did after an argument my father and I got into. I became puking nonstop, and my dad drove me to the team's doctor's office. The doctor said that taking that much aspirin at a time can kill you. My father was both scared for me and mad at me. My father then when we got into another argument, I ripped the IV out of my arm. My father then got really scared and explained why he was getting so mad at me. Finally, I understood him and he understood me. In 1989, when the Seattle Mariners went to spring training, they invited me too. I had no idea what to expect. At that point, I knew if I showed any weakness, they'd send me right back down to the minors. The energy in Seattle was low, and I came to change that with the way I swung the bat. I even heard rumors that the team would move to Florida if the attendance didn't grow. On April 3rd, I started in center field against the Oakland Athletics. Blood was rushing through my veins as I knew I had just made history. I was the first person to play in the MLB with my dad at the same time. Then it happened. The Mariners made a trade with the Reds, and my father was in the trade. The best part of my career wasn't winning MVP, although that was fun, or even a Silver Slugger, or even a Gold Glove. It was hitting back-to-back home runs with my dad. In 1990, he hit a home run against the Angels. He came back to the dugout and said, "That's how you do it, son." Then I hit a homer and couldn't wait to come back to the dugout and say, "That's how you do it, Dad."
Well, let's give them another round of applause because we are finished. These students have worked on these papers for a few weeks now, and it is such an interesting in-depth dive into each character that they learn so much more than they can even put into their paper. So if you have time during dinner, you can probably pick their brains for some more interesting facts, and they will have something that they were just itching to tell you, but they just couldn't fit it in. Also, I would like to point out that our dear Popsy over here, Andy Burleigh, that Caden presented, is here with us, and so many of our students have had the opportunity to listen to him give these wonderful stories, and so it was fun to see Caden do that as well. So thank you for serving, and thank you for coming. Another interesting thing you may have noticed, we have a mixed one-room schoolhouse style in our essentials class. We have students from 9 years old to either 12 or almost 12, and so 4th through 6th graders, and their abilities and their are different, and yet at the same time they have that wonderful benefit of hearing. The younger students hear the older students, and the older students learn patience and learn to mentor younger students. So that's a wonderful dynamic we have in our class, and as you were able to hear the difference and yet the similarity in the structure and the style that they write with, that gives them those tools to write with no matter what their age is. So I want to thank you all again for coming and invite you to dinner. Thank you, Megan Johnson, for organizing a dinner for us. We have some sandwiches downstairs, and lots of lots of desserts. Okay, well, yay. I'm sure the students will be happy about that. So we're going to go down the stairs, like by the doors you came in, and then down another little set of stairs to the fellowship hall in just a moment. Hold on just a moment, not yet. They're really hungry, so we'll be short. I know. So we will pray before we leave. Is Dr. Cathcart, can I put you on the spot and close us in prayer? Thank you.
The fruit of these children's work these last several weeks. And Father, we thank you for those who led them. And Lord, we thank you for the history that is a testament of your hand and graciously guiding us. Lord, we thank you for our nation. We thank you for the freedoms that we enjoy. And we thank you for the love that you've shed upon our nation. More than anything, we thank you for your Son, Jesus Christ. And we pray that we might be a light to those around us, to our neighbors. And we thank you, Father, that you give us the opportunity to worship you tomorrow. Would you bless us and keep us as we eat, as we enjoy fellowship, and as we worship you tomorrow. Thank you for loving us.